Thank you, La Presidenta. It is such an honor to be with you, to President Martinez, and to Your Excellencies, Congresswoman Ambassador Watson, who was the ambassador to Micronesia, to all those who are part of the podium with me, to all those in our audience, to your academic dean, Dr. Thelma Day, who is a sister beloved, to Dr. Carlos McGee, and to the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, the Link Sisters, but most of all to the faculty, administration, and students of Los Angeles City College. I greet you with joy. How honored I am to be with you today. What a marvelous symposium this is, and I thank you for the invitation, for the job that you're doing as president. Can we give some love to that president today? We honor you. Compañeros, felicitaciones, felicidades. It is my pleasure to be with you. For the past 4.5 years, I've had the privilege and honor of serving one of the baddest men in the country, President Barack Obama, the first African-American president. As the third ambassador at large for international religious freedom, a U.S. diplomat, I had all 199 countries as a part of my portfolio, and my job was to promote human rights, civil rights, religious rights all over the world, and to advise the President of the United States and the Secretary of State on religious freedom. A serious, serious issue. A lot of what you see in the news now with ISIL in Iraq was part of my portfolio because those are all religious freedom issues. But I had the honor and privilege of not just working for one president of the United States, but two. And so I want to thank President William Clinton and several members of Congress, Congresswoman Watson and Congressman Rangel, and others who embraced me and took me in and allowed me to be part of the national and now international stage. So I want to thank you for the opportunity. Dr. Day is one of your best ambassadors, and she has done a fabulous job, not just of pulling this symposium together, but promoting what you do around this nation. And so it is my delight to be your guest today. Now, journey back, yeah, you can give some love to Dr. Day. Now, if you journey back with me, I was born in the 1950s, so I'm called a civil rights baby. It's important to note in this context because I was the second child and only daughter of Black Southern parents, the late Dorothy and Wilbert Johnson, one from North Carolina, one from Virginia. Both now deceased had been sharecroppers in this generation, which meant that they picked cotton and tobacco in the fields with their bare hands in the blazing suns. If you saw the film The Butler, the beginning scene, that opening scene was a sharecropping scene, which for many of our ancestors was the norm. There's a saying, if you see something, then say something, and that's a saying now. But there's a lot that they saw in the Jim Crow segregated South, but weren't able to say anything about. They couldn't utter a word of disgust, they could not utter a word of dismay, they could not vote, they felt powerless, they could not volunteer even at the polls. They were both born poor and Black in the South, without support systems, without opportunities that could really catapult them forward. And so for a Black woman, my mother, the only ways out of the fields was to either become a nurse or to become a teacher. And so my mother went to Fairfield State Teachers College in North Carolina, went back to the field seasonally, taught her cousins and all the people in her family in a one-room schoolhouse, then met my father on their first day in New York. They met, married, built wealth, but they started with very humble beginnings. And so she was one of those who was able to get out of the field, but they had strong work ethics, they had strong family ethics and values, they had a pride that everything that had been deposited in them, that they were going to be the best that they could be. And so we worked hard, we played hard, and they were able to build wealth together and build a strong family foundation. And so that is the environment that I was born into, in a two-bedroom walk-up tenement in Harlem, New York, where I now have returned to. I was born into this wonderful environment where the church and love and civil rights and voting rights were central to who we are. So now fast forward. The year was 1963. I was 6 years old, a first grader at PS 78 in the Bronx, and the nation was ignited. Civil rights movement was at its height. Blacks and whites were buzzing and bustling all over. They were running, they were racing, they were chartering buses filled to capacity with waiting lists from everywhere to go to Washington, D.C. to see that scene that we just saw. But this historic March on Washington. Some of us were too small or too young to make the long day's journey. So what they had for us was called freedom schools. They were organized by civil rights leaders, and they were in the basement of schools and churches. So my location was the historic Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, New York. There was the Reverend Dr. Congressman Adam Clayton Powell Jr. He was the pastor, and the air was electrified. In these freedom schools, we learned that song that I just heard. Ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. We're gonna keep on marching, keep on walking up the Freedom Road or walking up the King's Highway, because our theology and our activism were all integrated and intertwined. In these freedom schools, we learned why our parents had to go that day without us. We knew that it had to happen, for as Langston Hughes said, life had not been any crystal stair. And so not only Dr. King, but all of our parents wanted their children to live in a world where we would not be judged by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. So blacks and whites told the stories of how they died, trying to march, trying to vote, trying to have freedom, to sit at counters and be able to eat their meal. There was nothing more disparaging than as a 7-year-old, we would go south for the summer. People on the East Coast who were Southerners by birth would send their children from the north to the south every summer, so that we would sit at the feet of our abuelas and our grandparents to learn the stories of our history. We would be on a Trailways bus going south or Greyhound, depending on what your route was. But we could not stop. There were no Wendy's. There was no McDonald's. There was no place that we could stop, so we had to take our food with us. So they'd pack us up with a shoebox filled with the favorite foods of the South. We'd have fried chicken, pound cake, ham sandwiches, and sodas that we could stop and drink by the time we got to Washington. But we would go south and we would learn the history of our people. So some of us can only grasp the magnitude of that crowd that day as we heard this man, Dr. Martin Luther King, speak. We watched on a black and white TV that was only about 9 inches. We didn't have the 52-inch screens like you got going on now. We didn't have color TV. In fact, the black and white TVs had little antennas with aluminum foil, so we could try to get the satellite. And there were only 5 channels, no cable, 2, 4, 5, 9, and 11. If you can remember those days, slap high five with somebody. If you just heard about it, slap high five with them, amen. And I want to greet our deltas and our links as well. But we wanted to see on that day if we could find on that black and white screen our parents or anyone from New York who had gone south. There were all those people that you saw on the screen. But we desperately were trying to figure out what was really happening. And so we began to hear this man orating. And we heard the famous "I Have a Dream" speech. We didn't know all the people around him then. But later in my life, I was able to sit and stand with many of them. On that stage was Dr. Dorothy Heider, Delta. On that stage was Andy Young and some of the figures that we know now. And fast forward, as a U.S. ambassador, I got to sit and stand with them years later as a beneficiary of what my parents and Dr. King were able to do. So then I was in the 3rd grade, PS 78. Integrating both a neighborhood and a school, a little girl. And my heart was broken as I sat on a school bus for the first time, excited about going to public school, and a girl named Geraldine Fitzgerald said, "I can't sit with you because you're black." I said, "No, I'm brown." She said, "No, you're one of them." And so it showed me, even at that young age, how race is such an issue in America. And so now as I write a column for Huffington Post, and I said, America really needs to deal with the new 3 R's. It's not reading, writing, and arithmetic, but we need to deal with race, respect for women, and religion. But that year, 3rd grade, Dr. Martin Luther King came to Hunter College's auditorium, about this size, and my parents took me there. And at the end of his very moving speech, when others were asking for his autographs, I made it over to Mrs. Coretta Scott King, his wife, and I asked for her address where I could send a note. My parents had, in our library at home at that time, we didn't have Google and we didn't have internet. So they had our libraries filled with what was called the Negro Heritage Library Encyclopedia. And we were just glad to have pictures and images of our people. And as I went through it, I had seen pictures of Dr. King and Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and here I stood as a little girl in the midst of both of them. I had just read and flipped through the pages of Where Do We Go From Here and letters from a Birmingham jail that were written by Dr. King. But I could only comprehend it as much as a third grader could comprehend. But after reading them, I wrote a letter to Mrs. King to thank them for coming to New York. And to my surprise, she wrote back a handwritten letter. And that was a life-changing experience for me. Because not only was I a civil rights baby, but now I had touched the hands of a civil rights leader. And from that moment, my trajectory was changed. I tried to follow Dr. King, and I tried to be a leader in everything I could do. And I tried to follow him until the day he was assassinated. I remember it well. I was in the 5th grade, 11 years old, still at PS 78 Bronx. We were on the way to the Cross County Shopping Center. It was one of the first malls in New York. And my mother was driving, and the news came across the radio, and she became hysterical. And when we finally made it back to our neighborhood, people who had been in the streets, dancing in the streets, were now in the streets together, sobbing hysterically. And then looting and rioting began to happen. And my father's watchguard and security agency, Johnson Security Bureau, which had just opened up in our family's basement, was now an entrepreneurial genius that was necessary for that time. Because businesses and people began to call him, and the men of the community and the women of the community were hired by my father. And they would come into our base bazaars, and Johnson Security Bureau, today still in its 53rd year and 3rd generation hands, was in the news and on the front lines. There are no accidents. I believe it's all providence. And all of this informed who I am, where I've been, the positions I've taken, the doors that have been opened, and the understanding why there are certain doors that have stayed closed, the ceilings that I could crack and the ceilings that never were crackable. But I never lost my love and my admiration for the King family. And so in my last year of college, I was majoring in speech and theater at Emerson College in Boston. And I found out that Yolanda King, the eldest of Dr. and Mrs. King's children, was at Smith College a few miles away from Boston. And she was a theater major, and I was a theater and speech major, and I wanted to meet her. But she also was at a point in her life where she was trying to figure out whether she was interested in politics more than theater. And so she interned with my brother, who was the first Black assemblyman in the Bronx, to see if she'd enjoy politics. There I met her as his receptionist. And so here my brother was, the first Black assemblyman in the Bronx. My parents, who could not vote years earlier, now saw their son, who was elected into office as the first Black assemblyman. And so we came a mighty long way. Yolanda King and I clicked instantly, and we went to Africa on an 8-week journey, backpacking through the motherland, becoming not only friends, but actually becoming sisters. We shared our family secrets, and she shared with me the nonviolent movement her father had taught them. And so all throughout Africa, we were teaching the nonviolent, what they call the Kingian nonviolent movement. And then our moms became friends, and then our families became families. We were junta, so joined together that when my mother died, Mrs. King called me her other daughter. And so now, today, Dr. King, Mrs. King, Yolanda, my brother, my parents are all deceased. But the legacy and what they deposited into me still live on. And every time you and I walk into or out of a room, or a door that's been opened for us, we take them and all of our ancestors, Cesar Chavez, with us, because we stand on the shoulders of greatness. And so now it's our time, and it's our turn. As now 50 years of civil rights, 50 years of voting rights, it's our time and it's our turn to find what I call the 3 Ps: purpose, presence, and walk in with power. Dr. King's purpose was so clear. And beside him, he had a wife that shared his dream, his goals, his love, his leadership. We may not always be so fortunate to have a partnership within our marriage or within our family, but I believe for this day we have to develop partnerships within our communities with one another, those who have similar purpose. And so recently I've launched what's called the Pro Voice or Pro Boss movement for Black, Native American, and Latino women to come together, to amplify, to multiply, to unify our voices. And some of that will be at the table, some information about the Pro Voice movement at the book table afterwards. But I believe it's the 21st century civil rights movement for women of faith. And so it's what I call a faith feminism movement, if you will, that celebrates, elevates, and creates more Black and Latino leaders. Cheryl Saunders says that we have to lean in. And I say we can't lean in until we get in. From C Street to El Barrio on C-Suite to Cucamonga, we need more Black and Latino women in as CEOs, COOs, corporate board members, technology heads, presidents of colleges and universities. Yes, we know how to do the non-for-profit world so well, but can we read a spreadsheet? Can we trade on the New York Stock Exchange? Can we go public with our businesses? Can we be U.S. ambassadors and U.S. senators and even U.S. presidents of the United States? We must be one. Uno, somos uno. And so we must find a purpose together. Find your purpose. You're here in this wonderful school. Stay focused on it. Let no distractions, no detours, no derailments, no discouragement happen on your way to your purpose, or what I call your destiny. And everyone has a destined place, a place of soaring, a place not of defeat. Find your purpose. I believe Pro Voice, Pro Boss is my purpose for this season of my life. But then there's presence. Presence. When you walk in, they should know that you've arrived. And when you leave, they should know that you have been there. No matter how much they talked about me, and they did, before, during, and after my ambassadorship, they know that Susan Johnson Cook was in the place and made a difference, not just nationally, but globally. I believe it was absolutely brilliant of the President and the Secretary of State to place a faith leader over religious freedom, because this was not just another diplomatic post. There was what we call chiefs of missions, which Congresswoman and Ambassador Watson was, where you have a country and you're responsible for that country. But this was a position to talk with all 199 nations about religion and religious freedom. And who better to speak about it than someone who understands religion? So here we were at the diplomatic table, and what happened there was that there is a collegiality, an international collegiality amongst religious leaders. They had Googled me, and I had been briefed on them. And before the diplomatic talk started, we were able to find common ground across the waters, across the political divides, across the aisles, across ethnicities, across cultures. And if we're going to succeed in the 21st century, there has to be common ground found, but they must know that you are present. And the third P is power. You must become a national, a local, and international influencer, a persuader, and have power. It is the ability to help a situation or a people go, flow, and grow from where they are to where their potential can take them. Your president has power, not just because of the title she holds, but because of what she's been able to do with an idea and bring it to full maturity, to pull out of you your dreams and help them become realities, so they are not impossible dreams, but they are indeed reachable and achievable. Now I want you to turn to the person next to you and say, I'm powerful. Oh, come on, you better help me out in here. Say, I'm powerful. In most of the Abrahamic faiths, there's always a hero, or what I call a shero, someone who is the protagonist of an exciting story. I like the two individuals who I liked most are Joseph and Deborah, because she was a trailblazing woman. She was the first female judge and the first female prophetess and a wife in Israel. She was a trailblazer. She was multidimensional, multifaceted. The problems we face today still are exacerbating, but they require a multidimensional approach. There is no one answer to housing shortage, no one answer to poverty, no one answer to what we're going through. But when we place it on the surgical table of our times, it requires a complete medical team. We need someone to cut it open with the scalpel of success. We need someone to catch the blood because there's been a lot of bloodshed. We need someone to check the heart rate, and we need someone to suture up the wounds that have not healed yet from our times past. I mean, I don't know about you, but we're jacked up as a nation, as a society, as members of the global stage. There's an entire generation that does not know the name Martin Luther King or Lyndon Johnson, does not know anything about the 1965 Voting Rights Act. In fact, they're not even sure if they want to register to vote. And they don't realize that we stand on the shoulders of many who shed their blood, sweat, and tears, and who sacrificed big time to get where they are so that you could be who you are. You remember I told you about my parents who started out as sharecroppers? One of the things that happened to me, let me tell you what happened as a result of their hard work and sacrifice being in those fields. A few elections ago, one of the former presidents of the United States called me. The deciding state was North Carolina, where my mother was from. They said, "We need you to help us." And I said, "Sure," but I was a pastor then. I said, "But you know, Sunday I can't get there until church is over. We'll have a ticket for you." "Yes, I'll be there." The deciding state was North Carolina, where my mother is from. I went to LaGuardia Airport. There was a ticket waiting for me. Had my name on it. I got on a plane. I met them in North Carolina. The Secret Service and all the people were there. They said, "Here are your credentials for the day. Your assignment while we're here is to introduce the former president of the United States, and he will introduce his candidate." "You got your assignment?" "Yes, I've got my assignment." "Your assignment is to introduce the former president of the United States. He will introduce his candidate." You understand? I was like, charged. "Yeah, I got it. They said, "There are 2 limousines outside. You're going to get into one of the limousines, and we're going to go by motorcade, and we're going to go throughout North Carolina, and you have your assignment." So I went to the first limousine. They said, "No, you have number 2. That was the president's limousine. Don't get it twisted, okay? You're just here for the day. Just don't get it twisted." I got it. We got to Elizabeth State University, North Carolina, did my whole thing. There was a motorcade. We had all the motorcycles in front of us. I was digging the scene with my preacher lean. I was all right there. I was doing well. People on both sides of the highway, they were waving at us, and I was waving back. I was like, "You don't know who I am, but I'm up in here. How are you? God bless America. Land that I love." I was waving my flag. So we got to several places. I introduced the former president. He introduced his candidate. Then we got to a place where there was a field, and they said, "We're going to go by plane. We can't cover the whole state in this short amount of time." So we got on the presidential plane. There were 4 seats. The president was in one, the governor was in one. They were facing 2 seats. There was a mayor in one, and I was in the 4th one. So that's somebody high five. So she was up in there. Yeah, she was. And you know, New Yorkers cuss, but I said I couldn't cuss. I had to represent. So I said, "Oh, Jip, okay, oh, Jip, I'm here." So then we had a pilot, an African-American pilot that got on. So you know, when there's a person of color, you try to identify, you try to lock your eyes and say, "We both up in here together." So you want to go like this, but you can't do that. So you got to just kind of act reserved. It's like, "God bless America." Yeah. So the president's trying to comfort me, and for one time I couldn't find any words to say. I'm a speech major. He was asking me questions, and all I could say was yes. But it was a wonderful experience. So we land in 3 fields. The first field was near New Bern, North Carolina, on the waterfront. People were lined up there, had their posters there. I introduced the former president. He introduced his candidate. Went to field number 2, the same thing. We got to field number 3. It was the field where my mother had picked cotton and tobacco. She had been on her knees picking cotton as her daughter introducing a former president of the United States. She had to use what's called an outhouse, where they didn't have plumbing. I'm now to walk in the front door of the White House. I'm a beneficiary of what my parents had to go through when there was no Voting Rights Act. But now I'm able to vote and even run as a candidate if I want to, because of all the work that Dr. King and my parents and all the sacrifice and all the bloodshed. So here I was standing with someone who lived at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Your votes are important. What you do with your life is important, because it's not just for you, but it's for the generations who follow you. So I have a dream today. that black men and white men and Latinos and blacks and Asians and Native Americans and all ethnicities and races of every color and every hue can come together. I have a dream that we will open our mouths wide together, finding our commonalities and not focusing on what divides us. Yes, some eat collard greens and others eat plátanos. Some eat grilled cheese and others eat bocadillas and jamón y queso. But we must be one, junta. Because when we wrap our femininity and our masculinity and wrap it around our humanity and our divinity, then we truly have power. I have a dream that we will be a presence and people will know that we were here. I have a dream that we will walk in purpose. I have a dream that dreams don't have an expiration date. So let's wake up and help our dreams to come true and not become nightmares. This is our moment. Este es nuestro momento. Our children must know that we were here. So our children must put down the guns and stop with the violence. They must once again respect our elders. They must register to vote, but we must teach them, and we must lead by example. We must love one another, stay together, pray together, walk together, talk together. I'm going to keep on walking, keep on marching, walking up the King's Highway, and then they will say, yes, you have power. Thank you.